The envelope was sitting on his desk when he got back from lunch. He knew what it was before he opened it. He had been at the company long enough to know the rhythm of these things. Annual review in the third week of October. The letter following 2 or 3 days later. The number inside always somewhere between 3 and 4% because that was what decent companies gave decent employees who did decent work without causing problems. He opened it standing up. 3.8%. He folded the letter back into the envelope and sat down. The raise was 3.8%. The market rate for someone with his skills and his experience was 31% higher than his current salary. He did not know that yet, but the arithmetic had been running against him for 7 years regardless of whether he knew it. He was not disappointed exactly. 3.8% was not nothing. It was above inflation this year barely, and his manager had told him during the review that his work on the Henderson account had been noticed at a level above her. She had used the word valued. She had meant it, he thought. She was not the kind of person who said things she did not mean. He put the envelope in his drawer and opened his laptop and went back to work. What he felt, sitting at that desk on that October afternoon, was something he did not have a precise word for. Not disappointment, not anger, something quieter than either of those. The feeling of a question forming slowly in the back of his mind that he was not quite ready to ask out loud. He had been at the company for 7 years. In 7 years, he had received 7 raises, each one somewhere between 3 and 3.8%. Each one presented as recognition. Each one accepted with a thank you and a handshake, and a return to his desk where he would do the arithmetic in his head and feel something close to satisfied before the feeling faded into the ordinary texture of the working week. He was good at his job. He knew this not from arrogance but from evidence. Projects landed on time. Clients renewed. The work he produced was the kind of work that made other people's work easier. He had been told this in various ways across 7 years of reviews. What nobody had ever told him was what his work was worth to the market. Not to this company, to the market. The number a different company, one that did not already have him, would pay to acquire the skills he had spent 7 years building. He had never asked. Not because he did not want to know, because knowing felt like the beginning of a conversation he was not sure he was ready to have. Here is the thing about loyalty that nobody tells you when you are starting out. Loyalty is a value, a genuine one, the kind of person who shows up consistently, who does not jump ship at the first better offer, who builds relationships and institutional knowledge and sees projects through from beginning to end. That person is genuinely valuable. Companies benefit enormously from people like this. What companies do not do, almost universally, is pay for it. Not because they are malicious, because they do not have to. The loyal employee has already demonstrated that they will stay. The new candidate has not. The new candidate gets the market rate because the company has to compete to acquire them. The loyal employee gets the annual raise because the company only has to retain them, and retention is cheaper than acquisition, and the loyal employee has already shown that they can be retained for 3 to 4% a year. This is not a conspiracy, it is arithmetic. And the arithmetic compounds in a direction that most loyal employees never see, because it never appears on any single document they are shown. It is distributed across years of raises that felt reasonable in isolation. Devastating when you finally add them up and compare them to what the market was paying for the same skills the entire time. The most loyal employee in the room is, statistically, the lowest paid relative to their market value. Not the worst performer, the most loyal one. In the last video on this channel, we talked about the invisible drain. The money leaving your account every month in amounts too small to feel individually, but collectively representing a significant outflow you have never calculated because you have never looked at them together. The loyalty tax works the same way. Not one large visible loss. A small, consistent gap between what you are paid and what you are worth, compounding silently, year after year, in a direction you only fully see when you finally stop and do the arithmetic. He had a colleague who had started the same month he did. Same title, same team, similar background. They had gone through the same onboarding together, complained about the same early projects together, celebrated the same early wins together in the same pub around the corner from the office. She had left after 3 years. He had stayed. He knew she had gone to a competitor. He knew she had gotten a significant pay increase to make the move. He had thought about it at the time, briefly, the way you think about a road you chose not to take while the car is already moving in a different direction. He had told himself that her situation was different, that she had been more willing to take the risk, that he valued stability, that he was playing a longer game. He believed all of this. He was not lying to himself. He was telling himself the truest version of the story available to him with the information he had at the time. What he did not have at the time was the number. Not her salary, the gap, the specific, calculable distance between what the market was paying for his skills and what his company was paying him to keep providing them. That gap had a name he did not know yet, and it had been compounding against him for 4 years since she left. I want to tell you about someone I knew. Not a client, not a case study, someone I watched from close enough that I still think about it. He was 24 when he got his first real offer. The kind of offer that felt enormous at the time, because it was more money than he had ever been paid, and the relief of being wanted was bigger than any question about whether the number was right. The recruiter called on a Tuesday. He accepted on Wednesday. He did not negotiate because negotiating felt like the kind of thing that happened to people who were more certain of their value than he was on that particular Wednesday. The starting salary was $4,000 below what the market was paying for that role at that time. $4,000, not a number that felt significant on a Wednesday when the relief of the offer was filling the room. He stayed at that company for 11 years. He received standard annual raises throughout. He was good at his job. He was valued. He was told so regularly, and he believed it because the evidence supported it. What nobody calculated, including me at the time, was what that first Wednesday cost him. $4,000 less on day one. 3.5% annual raises applied to a base that was already $4,000 wrong. Over 11 years, the cumulative earnings gap between what he made and what he would have made starting from the correct number was somewhere north of $60,000. He left eventually, for a role that paid significantly more. Within 3 months of leaving, he understood that the number he had accepted on that Wednesday had followed him for over a decade, shaping every raise, every bonus, every calculation his employer made about his value, using a foundation that was wrong before the first day of work began. I did not say enough at the time. I knew something was off about that first number, and I said nothing because it was not my place, and because he seemed so relieved, and I did not want to complicate the relief. That is why I am saying it now. Back to the man at his desk. This is the framework. He found the number on a Thursday evening. Not by applying for another job, by spending 40 minutes on a salary comparison website entering his role, his years of experience, his industry, and his location. The kind of search that takes less time than watching an episode of anything, but that most people postpone for years because knowing feels like it commits you to something. The number that came back was not shocking in the way that makes you gasp. It was shocking in the way that makes you very still. It was 31% higher than what he was currently earning. He sat with that for a while. 31%, not a rounding error, not a reflection of his company being slightly conservative with raises, a gap large enough to have its own name, large enough to represent, when he thought about it over the days that followed, a specific and calculable cost that he had been paying every year for 7 years without knowing it existed. He did the arithmetic. The difference between his current salary and his market rate, accumulated over the 7 years he had been at the company, represented a gap in cumulative earnings of approximately $48,000. $48,000 that the market had been willing to pay for his skills every year for 7 years. Money that had not gone anywhere dramatic. It had not been lost in a bad investment or spent on something he regretted. It had simply never arrived. It had been the gap between what he was worth and what he had accepted, sitting invisibly in the space between his pay slip and his potential, year after year, in amounts that never appeared on any single document he was shown. This is the loyalty tax. Not a punishment, not a conspiracy, an arithmetic consequence of one simple fact: keeping you costs less than finding someone like you, and companies have always known this. And then he thought about the morning 7 years ago when he accepted the first offer. He had been 28. The role was a step up from where he had been. The salary felt significant. He had not negotiated because the offer felt generous and negotiating felt presumptuous, and the relief of being chosen was larger in that moment than any question about the number itself. The starting salary was $4,000 below what a colleague who joined 6 months later in the same role negotiated their way to on their first day. He knew this because the colleague had told him, casually, over lunch, 18 months into the job. The way people sometimes mention things that feel like small facts and turn out to be larger ones. He had filed it away. He had told himself it did not matter because both of them had received the same raises since. He had been wrong about that in a way he only understood now, sitting with the salary comparison data on a Thursday evening, doing arithmetic he should have done years earlier. The $4,000 gap on day one, compounded forward at 3.5% annually over 7 years, had grown into a cumulative earnings difference of approximately $30,000. $30,000 from one morning 7 years ago when he did not ask a question, because the relief of the offer was bigger than the question. He had thought of it as a starting salary. It was a foundation. And everything built on a foundation that is $4,000 wrong is wrong by $4,000 compounded forward until the day the foundation changes. This is the baseline tax. The number you accept on day one is not just what you earn that year. It is the number every future raise is calculated from, every bonus threshold, every pension contribution your employer makes on your behalf, every internal band they place you in when they are deciding who gets what in the next round of increases. The baseline tax does not stop at the first job. Every time you move to a new role and accept the first number offered without negotiating, you reset the foundation. And every time you reset the foundation at a number below your market rate, you begin paying the baseline tax again from a new starting point. The calculation is straightforward, and it is devastating when you see it clearly. Accepting $4,000 less than your market rate on day one, 3.5% annual raises applied to each starting point over 30 years. This assumption is within the documented range of average annual salary increases for employees who remain at the same company. It is not a guarantee. It is conservative and historically grounded. The person who starts at $32,000 earns approximately $1,500,000 and $30,000 over 30 years. The person who starts at $28,000 earns approximately $1,300,000 and $40,000 over 30 years. The difference is approximately $190,000. From one morning, one number, one question that was not asked because the relief of the offer was bigger than the question. $190,000 is not an abstraction. It is the difference between retiring with options and retiring with constraints. It is the emergency fund that never had to be rebuilt after the crisis that came in year 14. It is the money that meant the conversation about whether to sell the house was a choice rather than a necessity. It followed him from one morning 28 years ago, and he never saw it coming because it never appeared on a single line of anything he was shown. There are two versions of the next 10 years for the man at his desk. In the first version, nothing changes. He receives his 3.8% raise this year and files the letter and returns to his desk. He tells himself that the company values him. He tells himself that stability has its own worth. He tells himself that the market rate number he found on Thursday was probably an outlier, probably skewed toward people with more specialized skills, probably not a fair comparison to his specific situation. He tells himself these things because they are available to be told, and because telling them costs nothing in the present moment, and because the alternative requires a conversation he has been postponing for 7 years. In 10 years, he is still at the company. He has received 10 more raises averaging 3.6%. His salary has grown by approximately 43% from where it is today. He is good at his job. He is respected. He has a vague sense that something never quite added up, but the feeling has become familiar enough that it no longer demands examination. In the second version, he has one conversation. Not a confrontation, not a resignation letter. One conversation with the market first, to understand precisely what his skills are worth to employers who do not already have him. And then one conversation with his employer, armed with that number, in which he asks for what the market says he is worth rather than waiting to be told what the company has decided to offer. The conversation feels terrifying in the anticipation and straightforward in the execution, because he is not asking for a favor. He is presenting a market rate. The market does not owe him anything, and neither does his employer. But an employer who wants to keep a good employee and knows the market rate will either match it or lose him to someone who will. Either outcome is better than the current one. In 10 years in this version, his salary is 60 to 80% higher than it would have been in the first version. Not because he became more skilled, because he stopped waiting for the company to close the gap voluntarily and started showing them the gap and asking them to make a decision. Same person, same skills, same work ethic. One conversation. Enter your role, your years of experience, your industry, and your location. Find the median market rate for your profile. Compare it to your current salary. The gap, if there is one, is your annual loyalty tax. Multiply it by the number of years you have been at your current company. That is the cumulative loyalty tax you have paid so far. Write that number down. Sit with it. Not in anger, in clarity. Because clarity is the beginning of the conversation that changes the number. Here is how to approach the salary conversation without it feeling like a confrontation. You are not asking your employer for a favor. You are sharing market information that is relevant to a business decision they need to make. The business decision is whether to pay you what the market pays for your skills or to lose you to an employer who will. You do not need to threaten to leave. You need to present the number and let the employer decide what it means to them. A decent employer who values you will respond to market information because they understand that replacing you costs significantly more than closing the gap. A company that will not close the gap when presented with clear market data is telling you something important about how they value your contribution that 3.8% annual raises had obscured for years. Either way, you have better information than you had before the conversation. Either way, you are no longer paying the loyalty tax in silence. The man at his desk on that October afternoon eventually did have the conversation. Not that week. It took 3 months of sitting with the number he had found on a Thursday evening, 3 months of telling himself he would do it after the Henderson project wrapped up and then after the year end. And then after the new team member settled in. 3 months of the familiar postponement dressed as responsible timing. When he finally had the conversation, his manager was not surprised. She told him, and he believed her, that she had been expecting it, that she had wondered why it had taken this long, that the company valued him and wanted to keep him, and that she would take the market rate number to the appropriate people and come back to him within the week. She came back in 4 days, with a number that was not the full market rate, but was significantly closer to it than 3.8% would have taken him in a decade of staying quiet. He accepted it, he thanked her. He walked back to his desk and sat down. What he felt this time was different from October. Not the quiet, formless something of a raise that felt reasonable and arrived by letter and got filed in a drawer. Something more specific than that. The specific satisfaction of someone who has finally asked the question they should have asked 3 years ago and found that the answer was available the whole time. He thought about the morning 7 years ago when he had accepted the first offer. He thought about the $190,000. He could not get it back. That arithmetic was settled, but the foundation was different now. The next raise would be calculated from a number that was closer to what he was actually worth. The compounding would run in a better direction from this point forward. He opened his laptop and went back to work. When did you last know your market rate? Not roughly, precisely. The number a company that does not already have you would pay to acquire the skills you have spent years building. If the answer is never, or not recently, or I have been meaning to look into it, then the loyalty tax is running. It has been running since the last time you accepted a raise without checking whether the raise was closing the gap or just maintaining it at a polite distance. The conversation does not have to be confrontational. It does not have to end in a resignation. It does not require you to be willing to leave to be worth having. It requires you to know your number and to be willing to say it out loud in the right room. Know the number. Say it out loud. Most people find it considerably less frightening in the room than it was in their head for all the years they were not saying it. Signing off, David Hangrove.